We are back, everyone. I hope you are well. Today we are looking at D2 on our lesson plan in our skill acquisition assignment 3. So today we're looking at the factors influencing choice of type of practice. So initially, when we decide on how we are going to run our lesson, we need to start to think about the type of practice or the type of skill that we want to put in place. So when we talk about the type of skill, we talk about whether what skill classification that skill actually is. So is it open? Is it closed? Is it self-paced, externally paced, etc.? We also look at the amount of information that needs to be processed. So we spoke about in our last session about complex skills. With a complex skill, there's a lot of information that needs to be processed. So we may decide to adapt our teaching based on that. We also need to look at environmental factors, so things outside of our control to a certain extent, such as the facilities that we've got to use. If we're outside and it's incredibly cold, the type of lesson that we run would be different to if we were outside and it was incredibly hot. I'm sure we've all been through those situations. You also need to look at the previous experience of the performer. Are they a beginner? Are they a pro? And we've spoken about the differences in those in our previous assignment. So you can identify how that might affect a performer moving forward. And then we also spoke about a performer's level of motivation in our previous assignment. So if a performer is motivated on one day and then is not motivated on the next day, that may impact the way that we deliver content in our lesson. We also might have a person that's highly motivated all of the time in comparison to someone that's not highly motivated all of the time. And again, we need to plan for that. So in your lesson plan, you need to think about how and why those 5 bullet points impact the type of choice of practice that you use. So in terms of practice conditions, this section is concerned with the way in which a skill can be best practiced. It may be best to practice for a repeated number of short sessions, or it may be best practice for long periods until the skill is completely learned. So we have different types of practice that we can use. The first one is fixed practice. So fixed practice is used primarily for closed skill practice, but can be used to improve open skills in the right setting. The learner practice skills through a set task without any change. So exactly, we know that that's a closed skill. So if there's something that's a set skill that we can repeat over and over again, that's probably the best way to do it. For example, in trampolining, when you've got a trampolining routine, or if you're practicing just a jump or just a throw, or a golf swing, for example, we constantly use the same fixed practice. Or in a team setting, if you've got a set play or a set practice for the skill in a game, then you can use fixed practice. So something along the lines of if you're practicing free kicks or corner kicks or receiving a serve in tennis, those are best used with fixed practice. I used receiving a serve in tennis because that is an opportunity or an example of where the skill is slightly more open. We don't know where the server is going to put the ball, yet we can react to it. However, the situation that we can practice that in can be fixed. We can just have one server constantly serving at us so that we can react. So that's fixed practice. Have a think, does that apply to your lesson? The next one is variable practice. The learner practices the same task in a number of different ways. So, for example, in basketball, a player would shoot in a number of different ways to practice shooting from different angles and from different distances. If we do varied practice, it cross relates with our previous assignment. So if we've got someone varying their shooting, that method helps to improve a player's what? Have a think. If we're talking about a thought process or a skill process, what does it help to improve? Hopefully some of you guessed it. It helps to improve schema. The varied practice builds upon those gross motor programs. Does that best apply to your lesson? Okay, then we've got two different types of practices. We've got massed and distributed. At this point, we are given the opportunity to evaluate, and we're given the opportunity to evaluate when each one is best used. So, to give a bit of an overview, should the learner practice continually for long spells, that would be massed practice. Or if the learner was to spread out practice in order to practice for short periods of time regularly, that could be regarded as distributed. So in order for this to happen, the learner needs to be engaged in a practice method that allows him or her to try hard and concentrate fully for your whole session. Consequently, the best method of delivers depends on the learner, really. And as a rule of thumb, it's generally agreed that distributed practice is the most effective because it ensures that high levels of concentration can take place without the element of fatigue kicking in. So massed practice then. Again, an opportunity for evaluation here. Massed practice is best when a performer is highly motivated and can cope with long sessions. If the task is simple, so it's not a complex, it's a simple task and can be learned in one session. What does one session mean there? So one session doesn't necessarily mean within an hour. It means with one focused period of time learning. It also is beneficial when someone is in the latter stages of learning. So, for example, an elite performer that's already experienced in the skill that they're trying to develop, but they're just trying to fine tune it. Or if it's in the early years when we need to experience trial and error. So if we're talking about serving in badminton, having a constant go of the way that we hold the racket in order to serve, and experiencing those errors to eventually find the best opportunity like we've done in lessons before. The novice then stumbles across the correct response, and we call that guided discovery. Does that apply to your lesson? And then finally, we've got distributed. So distributed practice is best in early stages when performers might become bored easily. So again, it works really well with amateurs in the sense that we can break a skill down and it gives the teacher an opportunity to share teaching points. So for example, if you're working on dribbling in football, you might give someone or use distributed practice so that the person can have a go at dribbling and can really focus on dribbling techniques. And as they become fatigued, you might stop the lesson, bring that student over or bring the class over, sit them down, and then give them some teaching points to build upon what they've just learned, and then allow them to go back out and do the same thing with the new information that they have. That's distributed, and it's really useful in schools. If a task is high in energy demands, then it's also important that you use distributed because fatigue kicks in easy. If we're looking at Usain Bolt's training, he often uses distributed practice because of the nature of the 100 meters and the sprint that he's involved in. If we've got a task that's complex and really difficult to break down, then distributed practice is good because it helps in the same way the progressive part method helps out, so that we can build upon what we've learned and take the time to reflect and really focus on the stages. Once we've learned it all, add it all together at the end. And if you've got a performer that has low motivation, or if the task is particularly boring, then it's best to use distributed so that those spells of boredom are only short. So to give you an example, it might be that you're focusing on one element of a sport that generally isn't the most exciting, however, is essential for your sport to take place. It also might be that if you're working on a set play, there may be one person that's heavily involved in that set play, but other people in the group aren't as heavily involved and they become bored. So it's essential that you have distributed practice for the other people that are involved. Okay, so there's an opportunity for evaluation again. Your task is to add this D2 content to your lesson plan. What I want you to do is highlight what fixed practice is, what variable practice is, and then what massed and distributed are. You also need to give me an evaluation of when massed practice is best used and therefore make a comparison to when it's not recommended. And the same for distributed. When is it best used and when would you not recommend it? And just to recap, you need to hit those 5 bullet points that were on our initial slide in the box of D2.